Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to show you guys how we can create a giant person or object effect inside of Krita. So at a very simple overview, how this effect works is that you will take two photos, one of which is a very zoomed out long distance shot, such as this beach here, and then another photo where you have a close-up shot of a person or an object that you want to appear to be gigantic in the scope of the other scene. And by combining a close-up shot with a far distance shot, you can make things look gigantic simply from the pure scale of it compared to the other objects in the scene. So for instance, this man, which we're going to turn into a gigantic titan, is already many times bigger than each of these individual people. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to mask away the background in this image so that only the man and the weights he's lifting show through in the final shot. So a good way to get a quick selection is going to be using the bezier curve selection tool. Using this, you can simply left click and select points in which should be included in your selection. For simplicity, I'm going to be doing this mostly with straight lines, though you can press and hold if you want to make it a curved selection instead at any given point. So for instance, in this curved area, I can aim the curve downwards, and then I'll have a second point up here to finish the curve off. And then I can go back to doing basically straight lines until I feel like a curve would be better. Okay, and then at the end, just reconnect your final point, and we'll get a selection of the outline of our person. So next we want to turn this selection into a transparency layer. So with the man layer selected, I'm going to go down here to add a new layer, and I'm going to choose transparency mask, which will immediately mask out the rest of the background from that image. And now we're pretty much left with just the man here. So next what you'll notice is that the selection we made still has these hard edges. It's very obvious where the lines were drawn with the bezier curve select tool. So how we can get rid of the hardness of this edge is to start by right-clicking on the transparency mask and choosing select opaque. This will give us back the selection of the layer mask. Then we have to hit B to go to our brush tool, and we should click on the brush settings up here to make it so that whatever brush we want to stroke the outside of the mask with has some fade. So I lowered it from 1 to something like 0.25, and this will give the edge of our stroke a softness. So with that, set the size of your brush to something that you think would be good to go all the way around here with. So because I did a pretty good selection earlier, I'm going to make this a small brush stroke at about 16 pixels. And next we need to go up to the edit menu and then stroke selection. And we're going to be using stroke type of current brush. We're also going to use foreground color of black here, so that wherever it strokes is going to be masked out as well. If you don't already know, when it comes to the transparency mask, whatever is black will be hidden and whatever is white will be shown in the final image. So I'm going to stroke this here. And what you'll notice with that is that the edges of our selection get a lot smoother, so it looks much better. And if we deselect with Ctrl-Shift-A, we'll see that it's a lot harder to see those lines than it was before. So overall, it looks pretty good. If we zoom in really close, we can see that due to the fade, part of the outer part got left remaining in there. So I'm going to hit Ctrl-Z so I can increase the size by a bit, and then stroke once more and see if we can remove that outer part. So edit stroke selection, and then stroke it one more time. So depending on the size of your stroke, you may notice going in here that on the outer edge of our selection, part of those pixels are still kind of showing through. So we can stroke it one more time with no fade. So I'm going to set the size of my pixels to something smaller, like 6 or so. And make sure that in your brush settings, the fade is set to 1.0 for full hardness brush stroke. Then go up to edit stroke selection and stroke it with the current brush one more time. And you can do it a couple more times until we can get this outer area to be basically invisible. And overall, that should be pretty good now. So next what we're going to need to do is fill in the gaps. So you'll notice here that there's a couple areas which couldn't be selected through one pin selection because they're a completely different area. So we can go in here with a brush with some fade added in order to mask these areas out as well. So B for brush, I'm going to set my size at something modest like 60. So in the tool options for the brush, I have stabilizer turned on so that I can make these strokes look a little bit smoother since I am drawing with the mouse at the moment. In brush settings, make sure that you have fade set to something lower so that it has a lot of softness. Okay, so now I can just go in here and make my masking. And if you make any mistakes at all, you can switch to a white color. So I'm going to make my background color here a pure white. So in terms of HTML notation, that's FFF, FFF. I'll hit OK. And then I can hit X on the keyboard to switch between drawing on and drawing off. So if I want to recover some of the lost data, I use the white brush up here. And then when I want to remove some, I use the black brush. And then I just need to go in here and fill in the gaps until I have my mask. So if you need, you can do a little bit more cleanup wherever you need to. But so far it looks like that's going to be a pretty decent mask. So the next thing I'm going to do is get the person into position. So I'm going to hit T on the keyboard with the man layer selected, and we're going to drag him behind the mountain here. And then we need to do two more things. One is to make part of the cloud show on top of him so that it looks like he's actually standing distantly into the background. And then the other is to hide his legs behind the mountaintop. So to do that, I'm going to start by duplicating the background layer, because this background layer is going to be on top of the man layer. So whatever is masked out in this top background layer will allow the man to show through, and everything that is not masked out will block the man's view. So basically we want to mask out the sky here, and that's about it. So with this top background layer, we want to mask away the top sky area so that the giant can show through, while keeping the mountains to block the giant's feet. So we can create a transparency layer for top background in whatever way we want. Since these edges are pretty straightforward, I think that using the Bezier curve selection tool will be useful here as well. So I'm going to take this tool and go along the skyline, and to make a selection where we separate the sky from everything else. Okay, so with this selection, we can create a new mask layer. So I'm going to go down to the Add New Layers button and do a transparency mask. And when we do that, the sky will be masked out, but the area in front of the sky, these mountains, will block the giant's feet. Okay, so depending on how good our mask was, there may be a couple areas where it's obvious that it's cutting out areas where it shouldn't. So I'm going to go on the top background's transparency mask and add a few more fine details in with the brush stroke here. So I'm using the black brush to hide some of the sky a bit more here where needed. And I think I'll churn up the fade a bit, leaving it somewhere like 0.5. And now I just need to come back and clear up some of these areas. You can also switch to white color again if you need to bring back the mountains over whatever is behind it. And then down here for the legs as well. And with that, it's looking pretty good. Note that having the fade helps a lot here with some smoothness between the edges. And next, all we need to do is add some of the sky clouds on top of the giant so that it really looks like the giant person is standing amongst the clouds. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate the background layer one more time. And with the man layer, I'm going to right click it and do a group. So I'm going to create a quick group. And then with the copy, I want to layer that on top of the man inside of that group. So then with the copy of the background layer that you put inside of the layer group, I'll rename the layer group here giant or giant man. And with that background copy, we want to change the color composite mode for the layer from normal to probably something like screen, and then lower the opacity down. And that'll allow basically some of the sky to show through on top of the giant, kind of giving it that misty look. And you can raise and lower the opacity to the levels that you want. So a higher opacity will obviously make it look like more of the clouds are in front of the giant, kind of obscuring it. And then having a lower opacity will make it look closer to the mountains itself. So I think having an opacity there of somewhere around 61% looks pretty good. And that's pretty much going to be it for the basic effect of how you can take a person or an object and make them look gigantic inside of a photo. At this point, you could go a few steps further. Maybe you want your giant person to cast some shadow, or maybe you want to manipulate the color of your giant so that it looks more like a fantasy titan or that kind of thing. So that's going to be it for this tutorial on how you can take an object or a person and make them gigantic inside of a photo inside of Krita. So I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my future video content.